Good afternoon and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to provide an update on our preparations for the UK Government's spending review and the contribution that we believe that review can make here in Wales to tackling the urgent climate and nature crisis. As you know, the UK Government has launched a 3-year spending review that will be published on the 27th of October alongside an autumn budget. Last week, I met with the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury to outline what the Welsh Government hopes to see from that spending review. The UK Government must use the spending review to accelerate the pace of investment in tackling the climate crisis and to make a bold statement about its intentions before the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow. As a Welsh Government, whatever our political differences, we want to work with the UK Government on the road to net zero. We must have a shared ambition to tackle the climate and nature emergency. As a Welsh Government, we believe that tackling the climate and nature emergency can most effectively be done by working together and using the areas for which we are uniquely responsible in a common purpose. A critical issue in this regard will be addressing the industrial legacy of coal tip safety here in Wales. The latest independent climate change risk assessment for Wales recognises the severe risks of future landslips, landslides and subsidence in areas of historic mining activity as a result of climate change. The UK Government has a legal and moral responsibility to work with the Welsh Government to address this issue. It can do that in the spending review, with a promise of investment and genuine collaboration to address this shared challenge and to manage the risks. And the risks are very real. There are over 2,100 coal tips on public and private land in Wales, and the majority of these are in the South Wales coalfield. There have been several recent landslides at coal tips in the Rhondda Valleys, for example at Tylerstown and Wattstown. As a Welsh Government, we have said that we will use our powers and our devolved levers to tackle this issue where the responsibility and funding are devolved. Over the last few years, we have asked the Law Commission to review legislation in this area, and we've worked with the Coal Authority to improve the collection of vital data that can help local authorities with high-risk tips in their areas. But the UK Government has to discharge its responsibilities here too, by making investment available at the spending review for this work. This is an area that needs special attention, owing to the unique risks carried by Wales. The UK Coal Authority has assessed that over 40% of all of the UK coal tips are located here in Wales, and that due to our topography, around 1 in 7 of these are classed as high risk. So the costs are not insignificant. Repurposing, reclamation and remediation of coal tips to deal with the legacy of the pre-devolution mining industry is estimated to cost at least £500 million to £600 million over the next decade and a half. And, given the risks to lives and livelihoods, that investment will need to be front-loaded as rainfall intensifies and temperatures increase because of our changing climate. The UK Government must use its much larger fiscal resources to help Wales address this problem. And I do recognise the serious tone of this ask. But there is opportunity here too, a chance for both governments to work together to solve a shared challenge. The chance to take the opportunity of demonstrating our collective commitment as we look ahead to the UK hosting COP26. A chance to show everyone what the benefits of a genuinely united kingdom can be. And, in doing so, to leave a positive, fairer and lasting legacy for former mining areas. Other governments are leading the way on this. In the United States, significant stimulus funding from the President and the federal government is being made available to states not only for remediation of former coalfield and industrial areas, but to help spark new economic growth and opportunity. The UK Government can take a similar bold step in the spending review. Later today we'll be debating this in the Cynhadledd, and I want this to be an issue on which we can move forward with genuine cross-party support, and in doing so, to begin to find consensus on what a real plan to address regional inequalities might look like. To go beyond phrases such as levelling up, and to outline a shared package of investment in areas hit hard by deindustrialisation. The UK Government's spending review can help us along that road, through an intent to address historic underfunding in rail infrastructure in Wales, including electrification of the South Wales Main Line. A commitment to review its decision to withhold £375 million of annual EU structural funding, which we have been investing in skills and apprenticeships. A promise to replace EU farm funding in full so rural communities can adapt to new market conditions outside the EU. A pledge to fund the ongoing operations we need at the border ports in Wales following EU exit, and a commitment to recognise the intense financial difficulties experienced by low-income households in Wales, now faced by higher gas prices, by restoring the £20 uplift to universal credit. Whatever our political differences, there's an opportunity for the UK and Welsh governments to work together in the coming years to tackle the climate and nature crisis, and to do so in a way that genuinely spreads new economic opportunity across the UK. The message I carried to the new Chief Secretary of the Treasury when we met last week is that I'm eager to engage on those terms, and I think the spending review is the chance to find that common ground. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions. And first of all, we turn to Dan Davis, BBC Wales.
Thanks, Minister. I just wonder how you respond to what the Treasury told us last night, which is that Welsh Government has had additional funding, including to make Tylerstown safer, that they wouldn't expect to provide additional funding beyond this, given that this is clearly a devolved matter, and that the Welsh Government is more than adequately funded.
Well, this is clearly an issue which predates devolution, and as such, the Barnett formula does not include an element to address this. It's certainly not designed for this. And it's important to remember that the issue of coal tip safety disproportionately affects us here in Wales. So you heard in my opening remarks that we have 40% of the coal tips in the UK here in Wales, and this is not something which has been addressed or designed through our funding formula as it currently exists. So we're asking the UK Government to step up and play its part, and we will absolutely do ours. So those comments from the Treasury are disappointing, although not unexpected. And I have to say there is another chance for the UK Government to review that as we head towards the spending review, to ensure that it does play its part in ensuring the safety of coal tips here in Wales. And we have to remember that the 500 to 600 million of additional funding which will be required over the next 10 to 15 years to make those coal tips safe will otherwise have to be diverted from things which the government is responsible for, such as the maintenance of schools, the provision of additional social housing, or the upkeep of hospitals and roads and so on. So there are difficult choices, I think, for the Welsh Government to make if the UK Government sticks to that approach.
I mean, it's understood clearly that climate change will increase the risk. But given that the management of the tips is a devolved matter, isn't it fair to say that until the landslide at Tylerstown, the Welsh Government had ignored the threat that they posed?
No, I don't think that's fair to say at all. And there's been a lot of important work which has been undertaken alongside the Coal Authority to identify and categorise all of our tips here in Wales. And I think it's important that I say at this point that the intention today isn't to cause any kind of alarm. I think that the fact that we have categorised those tips does speak to the seriousness with which we take this. And of course, I would also want people to be aware that if they are in an area where the coal tip is one of the higher risk coal tips, it doesn't mean that it poses an imminent risk. What it does mean is that those coal tips will require more frequent inspections to ensure safety. So I think all of that's important. We're investing in new technology to monitor those coal tips as well, using satellite technology and other forms of innovation. And I think all of that is really important in terms of demonstrating the seriousness with which we take this. And we hope that the UK Government will play its part, recognising that this is a legacy issue which predates devolution and is not something which our funding formula is catering for at the moment. Okay, we'll move on to Richard Morgan, ITV Wales.
Thanks, Minister. Yes, just picking up on what you were saying, you say the UK government has a moral responsibility to fund these costs. They're obviously saying it's a devolved matter. While all this arguing about money is going on, there are people in these communities who are looking up to the sky and worrying every time it rains about the state of the tip. So what would you say to them? How urgent a matter is this for you?
I do want to make the point that Welsh Government has provided a letter of comfort to local authorities so that they're able to undertake urgent safety work and don't have to worry about where the money is coming from, because of course absolutely safety is our number one priority. What I'm talking about today is an opportunity at the spending review for the Welsh Government and UK governments to work together to come up with a longer term programme of remediation work. And that is partly and primarily about making sure that those coal tips are safe, but also exploring ways in which we can use this opportunity to drive forward regeneration of communities, upskilling people to undertake what actually will be quite well-paid jobs in terms of the remediation work, and also to consider what more we can do in terms of our climate and nature agenda more widely. The Llinvi woodland, for example, is a really great example of where a coal tip has been remediated and planted with 60,000 trees. So, you know, lots of opportunities for us to drive forward lots of important agendas here. But of course, safety is the number one concern, but where there have been immediate concerns, for example, following the heavy rainfalls back in 2019, that work has been undertaken, and with a letter of comfort from Welsh Government about the funding.
And you talked about technology and how perhaps that's sort of making spoil tips safer. Can you say a bit more about how technology is being used to make them safer and perhaps to reassure people who perhaps live directly in the path of these tips that next time there's a big rainfall that they won't have half the mountain coming down on top of them?
Yes, Welsh Government has already funded a number of technology trials on various higher risk rated coal tips here in Wales. So this technology is already being used at the moment, and we're working with universities to explore what further innovations can be implemented. So absolutely, we're seeing this as being at really the forefront of the technology, because we're absolutely ideally placed to undertake that kind of research here in Wales. And as I say, Welsh Government is funding that. And I also want to reassure people that these tips are regularly monitored. So I spoke previously about the way in which coal tips are categorised, and those higher risk coal tips are categorised as such because it means that they will be visited more regularly and have more regular inspections undertaken. So I do want people to be reassured that there is a high level of monitoring and surveillance going on with these coal tips. And as I say, what I'm talking about today is the longer term plan for remediation of the sites. Thank you. So we'll move on to Ruth Masalski at Wales Online.
Good afternoon, Minister. When, if, as it sounds like from this, that the UK government isn't going to put this £600 million forward, then what? Is Welsh Government going to find that money itself?
So there would be really difficult choices to be made. Clearly the priority here is the safety of those sites. That's an unavoidable priority, I think. But it would mean, of course, that Welsh Government had to divert funding from other things for which we're responsible. You'll be familiar with our really ambitious school building programme that we have in Wales, our plans to improve the primary care estate. All of the work which needs to go on all of the time in terms of maintaining our roads for safety purposes, and all of the kind of investment that we want to make in social housing here in Wales. So there would inevitably be very difficult decisions about which areas of those we would have to cut in order to invest in the coal tip remediation work. So, you know, the offer is here with the UK government to work collectively on this. We have the coal tip task force, which of course the UK government and Coal Authority are members of. And I think that they need to be bringing something to this table now in terms of what they can offer to these communities who have paid more than their fair share. Let's remember, the coal industry made the UK a richer place, and that money wasn't retained for those people in those communities. So I think that there's a job of work to be done there on a fairness and equality agenda as well.
Thank you. Can I just about a slightly different topic as well? So there's been calls for fuel to be prioritised for especially NHS staff, for example. Does the Welsh Government have any say in that? And are those conversations happening with UK Government? Is it something you're considering here in Wales?
So we're having frequent and at least several times a day discussions with our local government partners, but also with the Cabinet Office and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK Government about the situation regarding fuel at the moment. And I'd start off by saying that I understand people's anxieties, having seen, seen the situation in terms of the queues and petrol stations which have run out of petrol. But the most important thing to recognise here, I think, is that there is plenty of fuel here. There's plenty of fuel in the refineries. There's plenty in storage as well. So that's not a problem. What we do have is there's a problem in terms of the logistics, and I know that there's work ongoing at the moment to solve that. So the point here is that we all have to behave responsibly. I know it can be stressful and worrying for people, but we have to remember that there are people who work in critical sectors who do need that petrol. So if we all respond responsibly to what's a challenge at the moment. We do have a national fuel plan which could prioritise certain individuals or groups, I should say, for the access to fuel, but we haven't invoked that yet because we understand that the system will get itself back into kilter very shortly. So, as I say, we're having continued discussions with the UK Government and with our local resilience fora as well to ensure that the situation is managed. It is a longer term issue, I think, in terms of the skills for HGV drivers and so on, which we're all familiar with. But as I say, at the moment there is plenty of fuel and we just need to act responsibly in accessing what we need.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So on to Bronwyn Weatherby, PA. Bronwyn? Okay, we'll move.
No, sorry,
We
I
are with
unmuted
Bronwyn.
myself.
Okay.
Thanks, Minister. Waiting lists in the Welsh NHS are at record levels. A&E waiting performance targets are the worst ever, and the Welsh ambulance service is under massive pressure. How much money is going to take to return the NHS to pre-pandemic levels, and how much of that will you be asking the UK Government for?
Thank you for raising this issue, and you're absolutely right to recognise the very severe pressure that the NHS is under at the moment. We've been able to, over the course of the summer, allocate over £500 million to the NHS here in Wales to help it continue its response to the pandemic, but also to start that recovery work. And as you say, that there is a very, very difficult level of pressure within the system at the moment. I think that part of it is funding. Actually, a lot of the challenge is about capacity within the system to be doing so much more. So capacity of people who are already in the system, who are understandably exhausted, but capacity to be doing more of the elective surgery, more of the regular work alongside continuing to respond to the pandemic. And as we all know by now, the pandemic itself makes the system less efficient than it used to be in terms of the time people need to take to put on their PPE and all of those additional cleaning requirements which are necessary. So there are lots of challenges in the NHS. It's not all about funding, and I'm really satisfied that I've been able to provide through our COVID reserve here in Wales additional funding which has met the request of the NHS in full at the moment. And of course I'm open to further discussions should additional funding be necessary.
Okay, and how much will it cost to reform social care in Wales, and will the 700 million union dividend funded from the rise of national insurance be enough?
The issue of the sustainability of the social care sector in Wales has long been of concern to the Welsh Government, and over the last Cynhadledd we undertook a huge piece of work where we were looking at the future of paying for care. Now, you'll know that the Welsh Government doesn't believe that the rise in national insurance contributions was the right way to go about funding care for the future, not least because it completely ignores the important principle of intergenerational fairness, which our work was very much mindful of. But that said, there will be additional funding coming to the Welsh Government. We understand it will be in the region of around 600 million for our budget. And what we don't know yet, though, is what that means in the fuller picture. And we won't know that until the 27th of October when the spending review reports, because, of course, Barnett consequentials give, but they also take away. So our ultimate envelope will depend on the decisions that the UK government makes in terms of funding areas which are not devolved to us here in Wales. So there's some uncertainty in terms of our overall funding envelope, but that said, we will have that kind of certainty on the 27th of October, so that's very positive. The additional funding the UK government is raising is for both health and social care. Of course, in Wales, we see it as a system which is mutually dependent on one on another, because, of course, pressures in health end up coming out as pressures in social services, and with social services pressures, you inevitably see them in health. So we're taking a holistic view, and we'll be having some discussions now with colleagues as our budget process continues through the autumn to determine the level of funding that we will be providing for those services and all services in Wales. I'm really pleased that we'll be able to provide a 3-year spending outlook if the spending review allows us, so that should give local authorities and health a better basis on which to plan for a longer term, which is very positive. And we'll be publishing our draft budget on the 20th of December, so there'll be another opportunity then to get stuck into the details and the numbers to better understand the allocations that we've made.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Over now to Dan Bevan, LBC.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good afternoon to you. If I can return to the labour crisis, the fuel shortage, as some have called it, we've seen once again today, for the 5th day in a row now, queues at petrol stations, reports of. What is your message to panic buyers? Because clearly this is unnecessary, as industry leaders have said. And what is, I know you've already mentioned one thing that the Welsh Government is doing, but what else are you considering? What else are you doing in order to levy this pressure on the industry?
Thank you for the question and for recognising that there is plenty of fuel here in the UK at the moment. So in that sense, there isn't any reason to panic or be panic buying. What we do need is for people just to act responsibly and to understand that we are monitoring the situation very closely, working closely and daily with the UK government, as I said, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and the Cabinet Office to discuss their longer term plans in terms of recruitment to the sector and the other issues which are structural. But right now, I think that we can be reasonably confident that the situation will come back into kilter in terms of supply and demand fairly shortly. So there's no need for people to panic because, as I say, there's plenty in the system if we're all responsible.
Thank you. And you're asking the UK government for a significant amount of money today, yet just yesterday, the First Minister at conference described the UK government as incompetent to its core. I mean, how can you ask them for money like that outside of the devolution settlement when undiplomatic language like that is being used? And also, how could you trust them with a UK-wide COVID inquiry as well, if it is, as the First Minister says, so incompetent?
Well, we've been really clear, I think, today and at discussions I've had with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury and in other fora as well, such as the Coal Tip Task Force, that the UK government does have a part to play in this particular agenda. And as I've set out this morning, I'm very, very keen to work in a positive and collaborative way with them. And I think the door is open for us to have those discussions. The spending review, I think, is an opportunity for the UK government to show its commitment to the Union, its commitment to Wales, its commitment to levelling up. And a perfect way for it to do so would be to do so by making allocations to Wales in regard of coal tip safety, which, as I say, predates devolution. It's not something the Barnett formula was ever designed to consider, and it's something which disproportionately affects us here in Wales. So I think an opportunity, for the UK government to be collaborative with us on that. And on the issue of the inquiry, you'll be aware that the First Minister has published his letter to the Prime Minister, and he's been really clear in his expectations for the need for full and proper scrutiny. And as I know we've discussed before, much of this is cross-border, interrelated work, and the proposed form of the inquiry, I think, suits that. But yeah, I think that there are important ways in which the UK government and Welsh government can work together, and I'm always very keen to find those ways, especially on the financial side.
Could I just follow up on that very briefly, Minister? Do you agree with the First Minister's incompetent comments?
Of course, I would agree that the UK government has shown itself in a number of ways to be so. For example, the way in which they've removed the £20 universal credit from struggling families at a time when arguably it's never been more needed, as we're seeing the price of fuel increase, for example. So there are things that the UK government absolutely needs to do to show its better commitment to people in Wales, but also to people who are struggling and who they can help, for example, by retaining the £20 uplift to universal credit. And let's remember, these are often working families who have otherwise, or in addition, have had to find themselves turning to food banks. These aren't families who are hoarding money away not to be spent. This is money which goes back directly into the local community, and I think that UK government has a good opportunity now to support those families and again to take the opportunity presented by the spending review to do that. Okay, thank you, Dan, and now over to Tom Magner, Carers World.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Good afternoon. Can I go to that other crisis, the social care crisis? I don't want this to sound like an exam question, but as I understand it, the overall health and social care budget for Wales stands at £8.49 billion. Now, before the spending review, as in right at this moment, how much of that is adult social care? And how does the social care part compare to what you think is needed? Be interested in your thinking.
That's a really interesting question, because social care is actually funded in a number of ways. So, for example, the Health Minister will provide winter pressure funding to local authorities in respect of social care, but then the majority of funding actually goes through through local authorities, through the revenue support grant. So there's a different mechanism to access funding there as well. I'm really keen to ensure that social care has the funding it needs to get through what I am told by leaders is one of the most difficult times, if not the most difficult time that they've experienced in social care. And to that end, I've had some meetings very recently with the leader of the WLGA and others to ensure that I can understand what their ask is in social care. So I've asked the local government to go away and come back to me with a figure of what they'll need to support adult social care through the winter, but also children's services and, of course, unpaid carers, because they make an incredible and important contribution to that, and not least in terms of relieving a lot of the pressure on the system by the incredible work that they do. So I'm currently awaiting the figure from local government on that, but I've been very clear with them that if they require additional funding this year, then that will be a priority for me.
Thank you very much for that helpful answer. With your local government ministerial hat on, how will you ensure that whatever that figure is spent on giving real people what they really need, and not what our viewers fear, an unfit service defined only by the money available and by what care professionals and local authorities think that unpaid carers want, even if that's not what they want?
No, and absolutely, people need to be at the heart of the care which is provided to them and at the heart of the decision making which is made in terms of the support available to them. And this all goes back to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the fact that the individual has to be at the heart of those what matters to me conversations. So I'd be keen to hear from you, Tom, in terms of areas where we think we need to do more. I know a number of carers organisations often challenge us with the need to put the user at the very centre of the care that they require. I think I'd like to take this opportunity as well just to highlight the opportunities for people to use direct payment at this point. Many people have found direct payments to be useful in terms of tailoring the package of care that they need around their own circumstances and their own relationships and needs. And at this point, actually, when social care is under such pressure, and for many people there is undeniably a wait for them to get the kind of package of care that they need, direct payments might be a quicker and more useful way for some people to access the care that they need, although recognising it's not necessarily the right choice for everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time and your interest, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.